Okay, good morning. So this one is a third video in our session 2. And in this session, what we'll be looking at is we'll try to see APL's maxims for learning, some cool principles that we need to be remembering in thinking of teaching, especially as we think of teaching as a Christian in a Christian education setting. And we'll also be looking at some things that would be helpful for retention, especially looking at the need for engagement in being able to help with retention of things that we are learning. So yesterday in the previous videos, session 1 and session 2, I mean video 1 and video 2 in this session, we've looked at what teaching is, we try to understand what learning is, and hopefully you've been able to develop your own understanding of what those ones are. So moving forward now, let's move in. So reflection-wise, so just thinking about it, so now that we've defined what teaching is and we've defined what learning is, so we ask ourselves, how does teaching and learning relate? Okay, based on our definition of the two of them, I'm sure by now you can see a very tight and close relationship between the two concepts. Let me unpack that. Let me just look at that. So how does the definition for teaching relate to the definition of learning? That's for you to think of. So in the APL, they provide us this. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 1 and Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 1. The way in the Hebrew how teaching is defined and how learning is understood. When you compare the two of them, what they will say is to teach, the idea of to teach actually has the same idea of learning. So to teach, the root word for to teach is actually to learn, has the idea of learning. So when you think of it, teaching has the idea of learning. Okay, so hold that thought. So the teacher has not taught until the students have learned. So if teaching has to do with learning, then for you to say I have taught, some learning has to happen. So if you have come into a classroom and if you're saying that you have taught, then you need to ask yourself, have the students learned? If the students have not learned, you really have not taught. So me coming into a classroom and saying things by itself is not enough. Even transmitting that information to the students, unless it creates some kind of change, some level of transformation in the lives of the students, then you really have not taught. So teaching and learning, they are related. To teach actually means to learn. So when you say you have taught, then the students should have learned. Okay. So you can be in a classroom where you're lecturing a subject and the students are listening. You're saying words and the students are writing. That end up in what they call the pit of passivity. They're just writing, they're just there passively sitting there. Learning is not occurring. So what needs to actually happen is the idea of causing the students to learn. So we shouldn't be allowing the students to just passively be seated in the classroom. They should be engaged in the learning process, critically thinking, asking questions, analyzing the things that you're saying, and seeing how they relate it with their own lives. So being able to connect it with life, and then being able to do something about it. So the students' engagement is important. It's not only the teacher actively communicating, passing on information, that's enough, but the students should be a part of it as well. So who do you think is responsible if students are not learning? You know, we've been in classes a lot, and we can be in a classroom and the students may not be learning. You may have taught, but the students may not have learned. So the question is, if the students are not learning, then who would be responsible? I would have taken a minute to ask you what you think. Is it the teacher or is it the student? Who's responsible if the students are not learning? So few maxims that we get from the APL. The first maxim is teachers are responsible to cause the students to learn. Who's responsible? The teachers are responsible for the students to learn. The teachers have to cause the students to learn. So primarily the responsibility lies, in this case, lies with the teachers to do what? They are responsible to cause the students to learn. A second maxim is teachers will stand accountable to God for their influence. So you and I are responsible to cause the students to learn as teachers, and we are teachers. We teach in different contexts. Some of you teach in Bible studies setting, some of you teach in youth group, in children ministries, different ministry areas. So in all those areas, we need to remember you and I are responsible to cause the students to learn. Now we're briefly defining teaching as causing the students to learn. Now I'll talk in a minute. Why should the teachers be responsible? I'll speak into that in a minute. The second maxim says teachers will stand accountable to God for their influence. Now you and I are privileged to be teaching. It's a big responsibility God has placed on us. So it's a privilege, but it also comes with a responsibility. So when we are in a classroom to teach, and God has given us all those people, different people, for us to be able to teach, to influence, but then we'll be responsible before God for what kind of influence we've been. If we're in and out of classroom, having no influence, instead having a negative influence on our students, if we're causing the students to hate the things that we're teaching, even, then at some point you will be held accountable for that. So we need to remember that. I know, like when you're missing classes as you want, and when you're coming into the classroom unprepared, and then you cause the students to lose their enthusiasm, lose their desire for it, then I think you and I will be held responsible for that. So we are responsible for the influence that we have. A third maxim is teachers are responsible because they control subject, style, setting, and speaker. What I usually do in a classroom setting is I do this. I tell them to stand up. And guess what they will do? When I tell them to stand up, what would they do? They will stand up. And I tell them, okay, raise your hands up. And they will raise their hands up. And I tell them, hold your ears. And they will hold their ears. And I tell them, stand on one leg. And guess what they will do? They will stand on one leg. Stand on one leg and hold the friend next to you. They will do that. They will do everything that I tell them in a classroom setting. I think you would do that as well. If we were together and I told you to do those things, you would. Now what that means is, as a teacher, I have all that authority. I can make the students to do all of those ones. So when I'm in a classroom, I have all that authority in the classroom to do all things. Even in this way, when I'm teaching in this way, you're not responsible. You have not told me to do this and to do that. I do the way I want to do it. So because I control everything, I am responsible for causing my students to learn. So in a classroom, when you're in a classroom, because you're in control of what content you'll be teaching, how you'll be teaching, what you'll be using for teaching, and all of those ones, you will be held responsible for it. That means you have to be very careful in your selection of all of those things and how you prepare all of those things. You prepare the best that you can so that you have a positive influence on your students. So why are we responsible? Because you control everything that is in a classroom. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing how much power God has given us as teachers? I think I'll say, may the Lord help us to be faithful to it. If you look at this one, I would say there is a secret that's written here, and I would ask you to discern what is in there. Of course, I don't have time to get you to do that right now. But as you look at this one, the students will try to discern this Latin statement here, and what you find is in the part that's underlined, you'll see a teacher is in control. So a teacher is in control within a classroom setting. Fourth maximum is teachers should judge their success by the success of their students. So just because you went to a classroom and successfully completed dumping all the knowledge, all the information you have on the students, doesn't mean you are successful. Your success is going to be determined by how much your students are successful in it, in grasping what you've been saying, understanding it, incorporating it, allowing whatever you're teaching, transforming them. That is what should be a measure of your success, not just what you by yourself are doing in a classroom setting. So your success, how would you know? You would measure your success by the success of your students. Of course, we're not saying the students don't have responsibilities. They do have responsibilities. You do your best in creating, in designing that learning environment, but then the students have to put on the work. They have to revise, they have to study, they have to do all of those things. If they don't do those things, if they don't see how to relate it with themselves, incorporate it, practice it, then of course that's their responsibility. So we're not saying students don't have any responsibility, but you and I have a big responsibility as teachers. Fifth maxim is teachers impact more by their character and commitment than by their communication. So our impact on our students is more significant by the way we live our lives, way more than by our communication. You and I may be very eloquent in a classroom. We may be very good speakers, talkers in a classroom. But if our life does not match what we're saying, what we're teaching, then our influence will be very insignificant, very small. So we impact our students by the way we relate with them, how much time we spend into the preparation of our class, how we come into the classroom ready for a class, how much enthusiasm and energized we are for the topic that we are teaching. And all of those things have a contagious effect. When you are enthusiastic, when you are excited about what you're teaching, when you are applying whatever you're living out, whatever you're teaching, then the students will be able to grasp that way more than just you saying those things. So that's the fifth maxim. Your character is significant for the influence of your students. If you see a person who has a terrible character and he's going to preach the gospel, you are likely not going to listen to that person because you know his character does not match whatever he's teaching. Then we have the sixth one. It says teachers exist to serve the students. This is a bit powerful, isn't it? We feel like as teachers, we exist for ourselves, to show our power, to show our authority, and all of those kind of things. But in fact, the reason we are in a classroom, the reason we are teaching, even I am teaching in a classroom in this format, is not for me, it is for my students. It's because I desire for my students to learn. And therefore my existence is to serve our students. And so we should remember that. When we teach for the sake of serving our students, to see our students grow, to see our students experience transformative life, and not necessarily for us. It's not just for going into the classroom and saying, "Ooh, I did this a wonderful job with this one." That's not why we are teaching. We're not even teaching for our own financial gain. We should be very careful with that, especially as Christians, as ministers of the gospel. Our existence in teaching is not for our own benefits. It's because we felt the calling of God and we seek and desire to see men and women growing in their relationship with God. So we need to be able to remember that. I'm sorry if the video is acting up a little bit. I put my hands forward with the camera, so it's a little bit confused. Okay? So what is teaching? It is cause to learn. The teacher should accept the responsibility of causing students to learn. If teaching is causing students to learn, then what would be possible barriers that you would face in trying to do that? Would be something for us to ask. What would be the possible barriers in me or you trying to cause the students to experience change or to cause the students to learn? So there are a number of possible barriers, and I would like you to just consider those possible barriers. Okay? Helping students learn, focus must be on the students learning and not on the teacher teaching. You can be teaching away vigorously, but your students are not necessarily learning. You may be doing all sorts of things in teaching, but then the students may not be learning. Question to ask is, what are the students doing with the information? So you are passing information, you're teaching, you're speaking, you're doing all of those ones. You have to ask yourself, what are the students doing with the information? What are the students doing with the things that you're saying? Are they engaged with it? Are they critically asking, analyzing it? Are they incorporating it, relating it to themselves? Are they practicing it? Those kind of things. Need to turn the information into knowledge, understanding, and helping them to apply. Teaching is not about students having information, but it is about their transformation. So I would like to underline that. So teaching is not about what? It's not about students having the information, but it is about their transformation. So get this one for me. It's not about the transmission of information, but it is about the transformation of our students. So that's what our teaching is. So what do we know about learning retentions? This is a Chinese saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Whatever I hear, I'm likely to forget. What I see, I'm likely to remember it. But if I do it, I'll be able to understand it. Based on that one, there is this study that kind of was done. So whatever you read, you will be able to remember about 10% of it. Of what they hear, 20%, of what they see, 30%, what they hear and what they see. So instead of the students just hearing what you're saying, if you get them to also see something, the amount they remember will go up to 50%. 70% of what they say and write, if you get them to discuss, if you get them to say something about it, if you get them to write something on that, then the amount they remember will go up to 70%. And 90% of what they say as they do an activity, if you get them to be engaged in doing something, then the amount they remember will go up. So what you can see is, you can see the amount the students will be able to remember goes up as you go down here. The more the students are engaged in their learning, instead of passively sitting and listening to you, if you get them to say something, do something, then the amount they remember goes up to 90%. Of course, your desire and my desire is not for us to just say something as I'm doing now, but it is for our students to remember the things that we are saying and to be able to incorporate it into their lives. And the way they do it is if you get them engaged, if they are actively engaged in the learning process. So may the Lord help us to design learning in such a way that our students are not just passively listening, but they are actively engaged and involved in a classroom. Because the more the students are involved, the more the students are going to experience transformation, the more they are going to understand the things that we are teaching them. All right, so finishing up, observations from the retention part that we just talked about. Our learning is not very effective when we are just told things. Our learning is more effective when we see things. Our learning is much more effective when we are involved and when we are doing things. So the more we get our students involved in the learning process, the more likely they are able to understand it and include it and make it a part of their life transformation. All right. Okay, so this is the third video. We finish here. I'll move on to the last video, which will be talking about adult learning.